The wedding hall shimmered under the glow of crystal chandeliers, golden light bouncing off polished marble floors, casting a warm yet almost deceptive glow over the meticulously arranged tables, the elaborate floral decorations, and the elegantly dressed guests who smiled, laughed, and clinked champagne glasses as if nothing could ever disturb the perfection of this day. Yet, in the midst of this orchestrated joy, Rajiv, the father of the groom, sat in the front row, his posture rigid, his eyes scanning every movement with a calculated intensity that only a parent with a protective instinct could muster. For something in his gut told him that beneath the veil of celebration, a storm was brewing, and though everyone else seemed lost in the frivolity of this grand occasion, he noticed the subtle inconsistencies in his son's bride, Maya, or at least the person who had introduced herself as Maya. The way her smile flickered for just a fraction of a second before returning to perfect composure. The way her eyes darted nervously when meeting certain relatives' gaze. The way her hand trembled ever so slightly when adjusting her veil. And although any other observer would have dismissed these as wedding jitters, Rajiv felt a deeper disquiet gnawing at his thoughts. The kind of instinctual unease that comes from knowing your child's happiness is at stake, and that appearances can be dangerously deceiving, especially when love is involved, and he remembered the phone calls he had accidentally overheard. Cryptic conversations on Odita's phone that hinted at secrets, the late-night messages that were deleted too quickly, and the way Maya had insisted on privacy at all times, a demand that suddenly, in the context of tonight, felt more sinister than polite. And as the ceremony began, with soft music filling the hall, the officiant guiding the couple through vows that should have been joyful yet seemed hollow, Rajiv's mind raced through every possible scenario, questioning everyone and everything, trying to piece together the truth behind the carefully constructed image of this bride. And when the rings were exchanged, their cold metallic touch symbolizing commitment, the applause that erupted felt like a cruel mockery in his ears, each cheer amplifying the tension coiling inside him like a live wire. And he watched Aditya's face, his son's face, pale and beaming at the same time, betraying nerves that Rajiv knew were more than just excitement. And he noticed how Maya's smile never fully reached her eyes, a disconnect that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. And as the reception began, guests mingled, laughter echoing through the hall, glasses raised in a toast to love. Yet Rajiv could not bring himself to celebrate, the unease gnawing at him growing unbearable. And he excused himself under the pretense of checking something outside, stepping onto the balcony that overlooked the hall, breathing in the night air that did little to calm the storm inside him, scanning the crowd below, each guest oblivious to the fact that a father's world was unraveling in silent panic. And he finally confronted Aditya in private, his voice calm but his eyes burning with urgency, asking questions that the young man could not answer convincingly, the answers stumbling out awkwardly, each one feeding Rajiv's suspicion, building a picture that was terrifyingly plausible, the kind of revelation no parent wants to face at the happiest moment of their child's life. And by the time he returned to the hall, the music had swelled, the laughter louder, the celebration more vibrant, a perfect contrast to the chaos simmering in his mind. And Rajiv knew that the night meant to mark joy would soon descend into a darkness none of them could have imagined. Because some truths, once glimpsed, cannot be ignored. And his protective instincts were already sharpening like a blade, ready to cut through the lies surrounding him. And though he forced a smile for the world, inside he was bracing for the unimaginable. For tonight would not end with celebration, but with revelation, shock, and violence. And every step he took back into that hall was a step deeper into the story that fate had twisted into something horrifying. A story where love, deception, and family pride collided with deadly consequences. The night grew heavier as the celebration continued, the music a distant echo in Rajiv's mind, his eyes unable to leave Maya, the woman whose identity seemed to shift like smoke the more he studied her, each movement calculated, each smile rehearsed. And as he observed, he noticed subtleties that no ordinary guest would perceive. The way her fingers lingered over the champagne glass with an unnatural rigidity, the way her posture stiffened whenever anyone approached too closely, the fleeting glances exchanged with Odisha that seemed to carry a language only they understood. And every instinct Rajiv had ever trusted screamed that there was more to this bride than met the eye. And he recalled the fragmented messages he had intercepted weeks ago, the ones deleted too quickly for anyone to catch, cryptic warnings about secrets that should never surface. And while others celebrated, laughing and dancing, Rajiv's mind replayed those words like a sinister soundtrack, each syllable magnified by the knowledge that his son's life, reputation, and happiness were hanging by a fragile thread. And he remembered the countless hours spent raising Aditya, teaching him right from wrong, warning him about deception and betrayal. And the irony that now, the very betrayal he had feared might come from within his own family was staring him in the face, veiled in the guise of love and celebration. And as he watched Maya lean in close to Uditya, whispering words that made him flinch, he felt the undeniable weight of impending disaster, a sensation so tangible that it made his chest tighten and palms sweat. And he wondered how he had been so blind to the small inconsistencies earlier, how he had allowed the facade of normalcy to lull him into complacency. And now, with every passing moment, the facade seemed to fracture, each crack revealing shadows too dark to ignore. And he noticed the fleeting expression of fear that crossed Aditya's face whenever Maya's gaze lingered too long, a flicker that told him his son sensed it too, though unable to articulate the danger. And Rajiv's heart pounded as he realized that the secret he had only begun to suspect was far more shocking than he had imagined, that it involved not just deception of love, but a betrayal of identity, a twist that could ruin lives and destroy the very essence of trust within his family. And he remembered a small comment from one of the guests, an offhand remark about Maya's past, a question she had answered vaguely, brushing it off as unimportant. But now every word, every gesture, every hesitation gained ominous significance, each a piece of a puzzle pointing toward a truth too devastating to confront openly. And as the evening progressed, Rajiv excused himself once more, retreating to a quiet corridor where he could think without interruption, the dim lighting casting long shadows that seemed to mirror the dark thoughts racing through his mind. And he dialed a number he had memorized from weeks of suspicion, contacting a trusted friend who had connections that could confirm or deny the truth. But even as he spoke, his voice low and urgent, he could not shake the feeling that time was slipping, that with each passing second, the danger escalated, the potential for public humiliation and heartbreak multiplying exponentially. And he thought about Aditya, his son, the boy he had raised with love and care, oblivious to the storm gathering around him, and he felt a surge of protective fury, the kind that overrides reason, logic, and hesitation. And he made a silent vow that no matter the consequences, he would uncover the truth before it was too late. And as he re-entered the hall, the laughter and music seemed surreal, almost mocking. The contrast between celebration and impending doom so stark it made his vision narrow, his focus zeroing in on Maya, the woman whose carefully crafted identity had evaded scrutiny until tonight. And Rajiv knew that what he was about to discover would change everything, shatter lives, and leave scars that could never heal. And as he positioned himself near the stage, ready to confront the inevitable, the hall, unaware of the tension, coiled like a predator ready to strike. He realized that in moments like these, the line between love and destruction was terrifyingly thin, and his pulse quickened with anticipation and dread. For he knew that tonight, secrets hidden for months would finally surface, and the world as he knew it would never be the same again. The celebration outside continued, oblivious to the storm brewing in Rajiv's mind, the chandeliers casting a soft glow over guests who laughed, danced, and toasted to what they thought was a perfect union. While inside, Rajiv's thoughts spun uncontrollably, each one a thread pulling him closer to a truth he dreaded yet needed to confront, the unease in his chest growing heavier with every glance at Maya, whose every gesture seemed rehearsed, too perfect, too calculated, as if she were performing for an audience aware of the secret she carried. And he could not ignore the flicker of doubt that had started weeks ago, small, almost imperceptible, but now impossible to ignore. And his mind replayed the moment he had stumbled upon Odita's phone late one night, a message thread hidden deep within, deleted almost instantly, yet leaving behind clues too significant to overlook. And he remembered the strange conversations he had overheard when Maya thought no one was listening, the hints, the slips of the tongue, each one like a tiny chisel carving away at the facade she had built. And Rajiv's stomach twisted as the pieces started fitting together into a picture he was afraid to acknowledge, a revelation that went beyond mere lies or betrayal, something so shocking that the foundation of his family could crumble under it. And as he scanned the hall again, he noticed how Maya's eyes lingered on certain guests with a strange intensity, the corners of her mouth twitching almost imperceptibly whenever someone mentioned the past. And the way she held herself, poised, elegant, yet her tension radiated through her every movement, the kind of tension that comes from hiding an enormous secret. And Rajiv's mind raced through the implications. How Aditya would react if the truth emerged, how the family name could be tainted, how the very fabric of trust within the family could unravel in a matter of moments. And he felt a surge of desperation, a need to uncover the truth before it was too late, before the wedding turned into a nightmare from which nothing could recover. And stepping closer, pretending to engage with other guests, he observed the subtle signals between the bride and groom, the whispered words, the fleeting touches that seemed loaded with hidden meaning, and each observation tightened the knot of dread in his chest. For he now knew the secret was not something minor, not something forgivable. but something that challenged the very reality of what he thought he knew about his son's fiancée. And the thought that Aditya might be completely unaware of the truth filled him with both fury and sorrow, the kind that burns quietly beneath the surface but can explode without warning. And he realized that the confrontation, when it came, would not be gentle, would not be quiet, for the shock, the betrayal, the humiliation would demand a response that no one could anticipate. And as the night wore on, the laughter, the music, the clinking of glasses, all seemed surreal, as if they belonged to another world, a world where truth had not yet clawed its way to the surface. And Rajiv could feel the tension mounting, the air itself charged with anticipation, his heart beating faster with each passing second, knowing that he was about to step into a reality that would leave no one untouched. And he recalled the countless times he had warned Aditya about trust, about appearances, about deception, and now, ironically, it was his own vigilance that might be the only shield against disaster. And as he watched Maya move gracefully among the guests, smiling, chatting, performing the role of the perfect bride, he knew that her secret was enormous, hidden behind layers of charm and sophistication, a secret that if revealed would shock everyone, including Aditya. And he could sense the moment approaching when the veil would be lifted, when the truth could no longer be contained, and he felt a cold determination settle over him, a resolve to protect his son, his family, and the legacy of trust and honor he had spent decades building. And though he dreaded what he would discover, he knew there was no turning back, for some truths demand confrontation, and tonight, the hidden truth of Maya's identity would finally be exposed, tearing apart the illusion of a perfect wedding, leaving in its place a chaos of shock, betrayal, and irreversible consequences. The music had swelled to its loudest laughter, and cheers echoing throughout the wedding hall. But Rajiv felt detached, almost as if he were observing from another world, a world where joy was impossible, where every smile, every toast, every glittering light only emphasized the darkness he now carried in his mind. And as he watched Maya stand beside Aditya, so poised, so radiant to the eyes of everyone else, he could see through the veil of elegance and detect the subtle cracks that betrayed her, the slight hesitation in her voice, the way her eyes darted momentarily toward the exit as if searching for escape. And he knew in that instant that the secret he had long suspected was about to explode into reality, a truth so shocking that it would shatter lives. And he recalled the late-night calls, the deleted messages, the slips of speech, each piece forming a puzzle that now screamed the undeniable, unthinkable truth. Maya was not who she claimed to be, that beneath the makeup, the gowns, the practiced smiles, there was a man pretending to be a woman, a deceit that had penetrated the very heart of his family. And he felt a surge of rage, betrayal, and protectiveness, a raw, consuming emotion that left no room for hesitation, no space for doubt. And as he watched Aditya laughing, unaware, completely oblivious to the enormity of the deception, the anger became sharper, almost palpable, coursing through his veins, and he knew that words alone could never convey the horror of the revelation, that the only way to stop the unraveling, to protect his son from humiliation, was to act decisively, immediately. And the hall itself seemed to shrink around him, the faces of guests blurring into a sea of ignorance, while the reality he carried burned like a torch inside his chest, consuming rational thought, every instinct screaming that action was necessary. And he approached the stage, his steps measured but purposeful, eyes fixed on Maya, whose composure now wavered ever so slightly, as if sensing the shift in the atmosphere, a subtle tremor in her hand betraying her growing unease. And in that moment, Rajiv felt time stretch and compress simultaneously, the seconds dragging and yet flying as he prepared to confront the unimaginable. And the guests, oblivious to the tension, continued to cheer, to clap, to celebrate, creating a surreal contrast to the storm inside him. And he took a deep breath, steadying his shaking hands, the weight of the decision pressing down, knowing that everything about to happen would be irreversible, forever changing the lives of everyone present. And as he stepped onto the stage, the music faded slightly, the chatter dimmed, the world narrowing to the space between him, his son, and the person they called Maya. And he spoke, his voice low, almost trembling, but sharp, cutting through the ambient noise. A question, a demand for the truth, for honesty, for identity. And the room froze, eyes turning, curiosity blooming into confusion and then horror. As the realization struck the guests like a lightning bolt, the bride's face paling, her composure cracking, the mask slipping as she realized that the father had uncovered everything, and whispers spread, sharp and fast, echoing like wildfire. And Aditya's face transformed from joy to confusion, the betrayal hitting him before he could even process it. The laughter and music now a grotesque echo of what had been moments before. And Rajiv's pulse raced, his senses heightened, every detail magnified, the reactions, the gasps, the stares, the judgment, and he felt a surge of protective fury, the kind that overrides fear, hesitation, and consequence. And as he saw Maya's true identity revealed, the enormity of the deceit, the manipulation, the lies, all became undeniable. And in that moment, with the eyes of everyone upon them, he reached for his pistol, a cold, determined calm settling over him as if fate itself had aligned to demand a final, irreversible action. And before anyone could react, before Aditya could speak, before Maya could explain, the shot rang out, deafening and shattering, the sound echoing through the hall, a violent punctuation mark that left everyone frozen, hearts pounding, the perfect wedding twisted into chaos, screams filling the air. And Rajiv knew that from this moment forward, nothing would ever be the same, that the hidden truth, once unveiled, had now erupted into reality, leaving a trail of shock, horror, and irreversible consequences in its wake. And the night, meant for joy, had become a tableau of tragedy, betrayal, and destruction, the perfect wedding forever stained by the revelation and the violence it provoked. The echoes of the gunshots still reverberated in the grand wedding hall, bouncing off the chandeliers, the marble floors, and the stunned faces of the guests who had frozen mid-laugh, mid-toast, mid-dance, as the violent sound shattered the illusion of joy. And Rajiv stood there, pistol still warm in his hand, his heart pounding in a rhythm that matched the chaos surrounding him, a mixture of fear, adrenaline, and grim resolve. While Maya revealed, now fully as the man she had hidden herself to be, collapsed to the ground, eyes wide in shock, her voice lost amidst the screams that now filled every corner of the hall. And Aditya, His wedding day turned into a nightmare. Stumbled backward, disbelief etched across his features. Unable to comprehend that the woman he loved, the person he had trusted, had been living a secret life. A deception so profound that it rendered every moment of their relationship, every promise, every kiss, a lie, and the guests, some screaming, some frozen in horror, some calling for help, created a cacophony of sound that seemed surreal, like a nightmare unfolding in real time, and Rajiv's mind raced, attempting to process both the immediate danger and the consequences that would inevitably follow, knowing that the police would arrive, that witnesses would recount every detail, that lives would be scrutinized under the harsh glare of truth. And yet, despite the panic around him, he felt a twisted sense of clarity, a belief that he had protected his son from a greater humiliation, from a deception that could have ruined him socially, emotionally, perhaps even financially. And as paramedics and security personnel rushed forward, trying to separate him from the scene, Rajiv's gaze remained locked on Maya, whose identity had now been exposed, who writhed on the floor, her mask gone, revealing a man dressed in what was meant to be a bridal gown, eyes full of fear and anger. And the contrast between the joyous atmosphere that had existed minutes before and the pandemonium now consuming the hall was stark, almost cinematic in its intensity, a tableau of human emotion in its rawest form. And reporters would later call it a scandal, a tragedy, a shocking revelation. But for Rajiv, it was a personal mission completed, though the personal cost weighed heavily on him as he realized that family, trust, and social reputation would never recover fully from this night. And as the authorities questioned him, as statements were taken, and as guests were ushered to safety, he could see Aditya crumpling into a chair, tears streaming down his face. The son who had believed in love so blindly now grappling with betrayal, confusion, and grief all at once. And Rajiv felt the crushing weight of responsibility, knowing that his actions, though intended to protect, had irrevocably altered lives. The line between justice and vengeance blurred. And as the evening stretched into night, the media swarming outside, helicopters hovering, flashing lights casting shadows through the shattered elegance of the hall, the reality of the situation began to settle in, the permanence of consequences unavoidable. And he thought of his own position, his motivations, the law, morality, and the irreversible impact of his actions. And in that moment, he understood that life after this day would be defined by a single, shocking event, the revelation of Maya's identity, the confrontation, the gunshot, the screams, the chaos. And though he had acted out of love and protection, the shadow of guilt, the questioning of what could have been done differently, lingered like a specter. And even as the emergency teams stabilized the situation, even as witnesses gave their accounts, even as Aditya was comforted by relatives, Rajiv knew that the night had marked a turning point, a fracture in time from which nothing could return to normal. And every memory of the wedding, every detail of the hall, every expression of the guests, every movement of Maya, every tear in Aditya's eyes, would be permanently etched into his mind, a testament to the cost of hidden secrets, the explosive power of revelation, and the devastating consequences of deception. And as he was finally escorted outside, the cool night air doing little to calm the storm inside him, he realized that justice, love, and protection were a fragile balance, one that could tip violently in an instant. And tonight, that balance had been shattered forever. The flashing red and blue lights outside the wedding hall cast jagged shadows across the shattered elegance of the reception, illuminating overturned chairs, broken glass, and the stillness of a scene that only minutes before had been filled with music, laughter, and celebration. While inside, the police moved quickly, questioning guests, cordoning off areas, taking photographs, and collecting evidence. The sharp scent of gunpowder lingering in the air like a bitter reminder of the violence that had erupted. And Rajiv, escorted to a quieter room for questioning, felt the weight of scrutiny pressing down on him. Officers circling, notebooks open, cameras capturing every expression, every detail, their voices clipped and precise. But beneath the formal procedure lay an unspoken tension, a recognition that the incident was far from ordinary, that the combination of a concealed identity, a wedding, and a violent reaction made this case explosive, not only legally, but socially. And as the questioning began, Rajiv's mind raced, recounting every conversation, every suspicion, every sign he had noticed in Maya, the careful lies, the subtle inconsistencies, the secret messages he had intercepted weeks before, all building a damning narrative that he could articulate only in fragments, each piece reinforcing his decision, but also magnifying the consequences. And outside the room, Aditya sat slumped against the wall, flanked by relatives who tried to console him, their whispers laced with anger, sorrow, confusion, and frustration. The son's world upended in moments, forced to reconcile love and betrayal, innocence and harsh reality. And he wondered how Maya, or rather the man who had deceived him, could have manipulated him so completely, a betrayal cutting deeper than any blade, leaving scars on his heart and trust. And Rajiv, listening from nearby, felt the dual weight of relief and dread. Relief that his son was spared further deception, dread for the legal and social storm about to descend, the investigation now a knife edge that could sever reputations and relationships with precision. And as officers moved through the hall, questioning caterers, photographers, guests, and witnesses, each account slightly different, Rajiv noticed the subtle variations in recollection, the way fear, shock, and self-preservation colored every story, the way Maya's calmness before the shot seemed to distort in memory, a reminder that perception could be unreliable even in moments of extreme clarity. And the media, already gathering outside, hung on every update, reporters broadcasting live, social media exploding, every tweet, every image, every video clip scrutinized and dissected, fueling public outrage and speculation, while inside, the family struggled with internal conflict, relatives debating whether Rajiv's actions were justified or criminal, whether love could excuse violence, and whether secrets, no matter how deeply buried, justified such drastic measures. And the tension between protecting family honor and abiding by the law created fissures that threatened to fracture relationships irreparably. And Aditya, caught between his father's protective instinct and the devastation of betrayal, wrestled with anger, confusion, and loyalty, unable to articulate whether his father's actions were salvation or damnation. And as Rajiv recounted events to the lead officer, describing his suspicions, the intercepted messages, the inconsistencies, he noticed subtle signs of judgment, disbelief, and concern on the investigators' faces, realizing that the truth, while clear to him, might not be enough to absolve him legally or socially. And he thought about the ripple effects, the conversations, the rumors, the friends, the community, the future of his son, and the consequences of exposing Maya's hidden identity in such a violent manner. And as the night dragged on, the investigation became more intricate, with forensic analysis, witness statements, and conflicting narratives layering complexity onto the already explosive situation. While Rajiv, exhausted but resolute, understood that every action, every word, every decision from this point forward would shape not only the legal outcome but the emotional landscape of his family. The fracture between loyalty and justice, love and betrayal, and he realized that the night's events were only the beginning, that the path ahead would be filled with confrontation, reckoning, and the painful unearthing of truths that some might wish had remained hidden forever. And as he watched Aditya sit silently, grief and confusion etched across his face, he knew that family bonds would be tested in ways they had never imagined, that trust, once broken, would take years to rebuild, and that the consequences of deception, exposure, and violence were now an inescapable reality that would define their lives forever. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation, tension, and the murmur of reporters, relatives, and onlookers who had come to witness the trial that had captured national attention. A wedding turned into a scandal, a father turned accused, a bride turned revealed, and a son caught in the crossfire of love, betrayal, and justice. And Rajiv sat at the defendant's table, hands clenched, eyes scanning the room, heart heavy with the weight of what had happened, knowing that every word spoken in this room could influence the future of his family, the perception of his actions, and the legacy of protection and morality he had tried to uphold. While across the room, Aditya's face reflected confusion, pain, and an inability to reconcile the man he loved with the deception that had shattered his world. And the prosecutors wasted no time laying out the case, their words sharp, precise, filled with accusation, describing the gunshot, the revelation of Maya's identity, the chaos, the fear, the emotional trauma inflicted upon the wedding guests, and every detail dissected under the unforgiving light of the law. While the defense argued with measured calm, presenting Rajiv's suspicions, the intercepted messages, the subtle signs of deception, and the emotional turmoil he had experienced, emphasizing his role as a protective father, acting in the interest of preventing further harm to his son. And as witnesses were called to recount the events of the wedding, some with shock still visible in their expressions, some hesitant, some incredulous, Rajiv realized how perception could vary wildly, how the same moment could be recalled differently, distorted by fear, trauma, and personal bias. And each account brought fresh waves of tension crashing through him, a reminder that truth is often subjective, layered, and contested. And while the legal battle raged, the media outside had transformed the story into a spectacle. Headlines screaming betrayal, deception, scandal, father's fury. The public split into camps debating morality, legality, and social norms, each comment, tweet, and opinion magnifying the pressure, making it clear that this trial was no longer just about one family, but a national fascination. and Rajiv could feel the weight of scrutiny pressing down on every action, every word, every reaction, while inside, Aditya struggled with conflicting emotions, loyalty to his father, grief for the life he thought he knew, anger at the deceit, and an inability to reconcile love with betrayal. And as the judge called for order, the room fell into tense silence, every eye upon the participants, every detail noted, every expression examined, and the trial progressed, evidence presented, timelines reconstructed, emotions aired, legal arguments made with precision, and Rajiv's mind remained focused yet weary, weighing the cost of each testimony, the implications for his son, the damage to family reputation, and the permanence of the night's violent revelation. And as the hours stretched into days, he noticed subtle shifts in strategy, witnesses swaying under cross-examination, media influence leaking into the courtroom through the public narrative, and he understood that, beyond the law, perception and emotional resonance would shape the outcome, defining not just guilt or innocence, but the moral judgment of society, the fractured loyalty of family, and the painful reality that some actions, though intended to protect, could never be fully justified in the eyes of the public. And yet he held fast to the knowledge that he had acted from a place of love and protection. That deception had been uncovered, that the chaos had prevented further potential harm. And though the courtroom was a crucible, a place of judgment and accountability, it was also the arena where truth, however complicated, could finally emerge. And as the trial continued, the story unfolded, layer by layer, each revelation, each piece of evidence, each witness, bringing the emotional stakes higher, forcing Rajiv, Aditya, and everyone involved to confront the magnitude of betrayal, the fragility of trust, and the consequences of secrets kept too long. And by the end of each day, as the courtroom emptied and the city outside buzzed with debate, Rajiv returned home exhausted, aware that the resolution was far from complete. That public outrage, legal scrutiny, and familial wounds would continue to shape their lives, and that some scars, though invisible, would last a lifetime. A constant reminder of a wedding that became a trial, a revelation that became a judgment, and a secret that demanded a reckoning beyond what anyone could have imagined. The courtroom was silent, the air thick with anticipation, every eye fixed on the judge as he prepared to deliver the verdict, a moment that would define lives, reputations, and relationships forever. And Rajiv sat rigid, hands clasped tightly, heart hammering, mind racing through every decision, every action, every consequence of that fateful night, knowing that no amount of preparation could soften the blow of judgment. While Aditya sat beside him, pale, tense, his mind a whirlwind of betrayal, love, confusion, and grief, struggling to process the events that had shattered his world. And outside the courtroom, the city was alive with rumors, social media buzzing with speculation, journalists crowding every corner, the public divided into camps, debating morality, justice, and the man's actions, each opinion adding pressure, each headline reinforcing the magnitude of what had transpired. And inside, witnesses waited nervously, lawyers whispered last-minute strategies, and the tension was palpable, electric, suffocating, as the judge began to speak, his voice calm yet authoritative, detailing the events, the evidence, the testimonies, The motives, the intent, and every word felt like a weight pressing down on Rajiv. Each sentence a reminder of the irrevocable consequences of his actions. And as the judge paused, letting the gravity of the moment settle, Rajiv's mind flickered back to the night of the wedding. The glittering chandeliers, the laughter, the champagne, the subtle signs of deceit, the hidden identity of Maya, the betrayal that had cut through his family. And he felt a mixture of relief and fear. Relief that the truth had been revealed, fear of the repercussions that the verdict would bring. And Oditia's hand trembled slightly as he gripped the edge of the table, eyes fixed on his father, searching for answers, for reassurance, for understanding, while lawyers for both sides sat poised, prepared to react, to counter, to interpret. Every expression scrutinized, every gesture noted. And when the verdict finally came, the word resonated like a thunderclap, echoing through the courtroom, through the hallways, through the collective consciousness of everyone involved. A verdict that declared Rajiv guilty of a crime, yet partially excused due to the extreme emotional duress, the perceived threat to his son, and the extraordinary circumstances of deception. And the room erupted in a mixture of shock, sighs, gasps, and whispered debates, some nodding in understanding, others shaking heads in disbelief, while Rajiv remained stoic, absorbing the weight of judgment, aware that punishment, social ostracization, and emotional scars would be unavoidable, yet comforted by the knowledge that the truth had finally emerged, that deception had been exposed, and that his son had been shielded from deeper betrayal. And as the bailiff escorted him from the courtroom, the press swarmed, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward, questions hurled, interpretations demanded, and every step felt surreal, a blur of chaos, scrutiny, and the heavy burden of responsibility. And outside, Aditya faced relatives, friends, and strangers alike, their expressions a mixture of sympathy, judgment, and curiosity, as he tried to reconcile love with betrayal, grief with relief, and innocence with the harsh reality of life altered forever. And Rajiv, though physically free to leave, carried the invisible chains of guilt, memory, and consequence, understanding that punishment was not only legal but emotional, social, and personal, that the fallout would touch every corner of their lives, and that rebuilding trust, restoring family bonds, and navigating public perception would be a journey fraught with pain, challenges, and constant reminders of the night that had changed everything. And as he glanced at the son he had tried to protect, he realized that some wounds, though unseen, would never fully heal, that love and protection sometimes demanded actions that the world could not condone, and that the line between right and wrong, justice and vengeance, truth and deception, was far more complex than anyone could imagine, a complexity that would continue to shape their lives, decisions, and relationships for years to come. And in the quiet aftermath, amidst public scrutiny, legal consequences, and familial conflict, Rajiv understood that life, like that fateful wedding night, was fragile, unpredictable, and forever altered by the revelation of truth, the eruption of betrayal, and the irreversible consequences of choices made in the heat of emotion. The days following the verdict were heavy with tension, silence, and the unspoken weight of what had transpired. As Rajiv returned home to a house that once symbolized comfort and warmth, now feeling cold, fragmented and almost foreign. Each room a reminder of the wedding, the revelation, the chaos, and the irreversible consequences that had rippled through every aspect of their lives. While Aditya moved through the house like a ghost, caught between love for his father, anger at the betrayal he had suffered, grief for the person he thought he knew, and confusion over the societal judgment that now colored their family's reputation, and attempts at conversation were awkward, strained, and loaded with emotional landmines, each word carrying the potential to ignite conflict or deepen the fracture. And Rajiv, burdened by guilt, yet steadfast in the belief that he had acted to protect, tried to bridge the gap, offering explanations, apologies, and reasoning, but found that love alone could not repair the complex tapestry of betrayal, trust, and hurt that had been torn apart in an instant. And as they sat together, sometimes in silence, sometimes exchanging fractured sentences, the weight of judgment from relatives, friends, and neighbors pressed in from all sides. Each glance, each whispered comment, each subtle reaction reinforcing the reality that the world outside would never view their family as it once had. And inside, Aditya grappled with his emotions. The collision of loyalty and betrayal, love and anger, admiration and disillusionment, each feeling twisting inside him, knotting together in ways that made every interaction with his father, every attempt at reconciliation, a careful dance between restraint and expression. And Rajiv, sensing his son's inner turmoil, understood that forgiveness would not come quickly, that trust would need to be rebuilt through actions more than words, through patience, consistency, and demonstration of care, rather than justification of past actions. And yet, he could not deny the satisfaction of having uncovered the truth, prevented deeper deception, and shielded his son from further potential harm. A moral complexity that weighed on him as heavily as the legal consequences he faced. And the household became a study in contrast. Moments of tentative connection, punctuated by tension, miscommunication, and raw emotional vulnerability. Each meal, each conversation, each glance carrying layers of meaning, potential reconciliation, and the risk of renewed conflict. And as relatives visited, offering condolences, advice, or judgment, the pressure intensified, the external world echoing the internal turmoil, amplifying insecurities, doubts, and resentments, while both father and son struggled to navigate their feelings, neither fully able to express, understand, or reconcile the events. And the legacy of deception, the violent revelation, and the public fallout lingered like a shadow, coloring every interaction, every decision, and every reflection, forcing them to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature, vulnerability, and the fragility of relationships. And Rajiv, in private moments, reflected on the thin line between protection and destruction, between acting on instinct and the consequences of irreversible choices, while Aditya wrestled with the tension between his gratitude, his anger, and his sense of identity, caught in the turbulence of betrayal and love. And as days turned into weeks, small gestures, tentative conversations, and shared silence began to hint at the possibility of understanding, though the emotional scars remained vivid, unhealed, and persistent, a constant reminder of the night that had changed their lives, the choices that had been made, and the delicate, ongoing process of rebuilding fractured bonds, trust, and family unity. Knowing that forgiveness, reconciliation, and restoration of normalcy would be a long, challenging journey, fraught with setbacks and continued emotional negotiation, and that the shadows of the past would linger, shaping their present and future. A silent testament to the complexity of human relationships, the consequences of deception, and the enduring struggle between love, morality, and survival in a world where truth is often painful and loyalty is tested in ways that define the very essence of family. Months had passed since that fateful night, yet the shadow of the wedding, the revelation, and the violent confrontation lingered like a persistent echo, shaping every interaction, every thought, and every decision for Rajiv, Odisha, and everyone involved. And though time had dulled the raw shock, it had not erased the emotional scars, nor had it healed the fragile threads of trust that had been shattered so violently. And Rajiv, once a father confident in his ability to protect, now moved through life with a cautious weight, aware that the line between love and destruction, protection and harm, was finer than he had ever imagined. And he often reflected on the choices he had made, the gunshot that had changed everything, the secret that had been uncovered, and the consequences, legal, social, emotional, that continued to ripple outward, while Aditya navigated his own journey of recovery, reconciling the father he loved with the violence he had enacted, the deception he had uncovered, and the new reality that had forever altered his perception of love, trust, and human complexity. And the family, though fractured, began tentative steps, moments of silence that spoke louder than words, attempts to bridge gaps that had once seemed insurmountable. Each day a careful negotiation of emotions, patience, and understanding. While the wider community slowly adjusted, whispers replaced by cautious respect, judgment balanced by recognition of the extraordinary circumstances, and the media attention that had once been intense gradually waned, though the story remained a cautionary tale of deception, trust, and the consequences of hidden truths. A story that would be recounted in hushed tones for years, a permanent reminder of how quickly life could unravel. And as Rajiv and Aditya sat together in quiet reflection, the weight of the past heavy but tempered by resilience, they found small moments of connection, laughter breaking through the tension, tentative acknowledgments of shared grief and survival. And though some relationships would never fully restore, and some wounds would remain visible or hidden beneath layers of caution, they understood that life had moved forward, and that healing, however slow, was possible. And they recognized the lessons embedded in the tragedy, the fragility of trust, the dangers of hidden identities, the moral complexity of protection, and the enduring strength required to navigate the aftermath of deception. And as they looked toward the future, both father and son carried the memory of that night, the revelation and the confrontation, not as a source of shame or regret alone, but as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the bonds of family, and the capacity for understanding even in the wake of extraordinary betrayal. And Rajiv often thought about the delicate balance of morality, action, and consequence, knowing that his choices, though violent, had been rooted in love and protection, a complex truth that could never be simplified for outsiders. While Aditya learned to integrate the lessons of trust, vigilance, and emotional discernment into his own understanding of life and relationships, and together they rebuilt routines, family rituals, and moments of connection, acknowledging that the past would always be a part of them, yet refusing to let it define the totality of their lives. And as evening fell on their home, with the golden light of sunset streaming through windows, illuminating a space once filled with chaos, now touched with tentative peace, Rajiv and Aditya shared a quiet understanding, a mutual recognition of survival, resilience, and the capacity to continue living fully despite the trauma endured. And they knew that while life would never return to the naive simplicity of before, it could still hold moments of love, trust, and hope. And in that fragile, complex space between past pain and future possibility, the story of deception, revelation, violence, and family endured, not as a simple tale of right or wrong, but as a deeply human chronicle of choices, consequences, and the enduring struggle to reconcile truth, love, and morality in an imperfect world.